It's the top 5 commander archetypes.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to Commander Countdown. This is a series where we poll you guys on various commander topics and share those with you. And today we're going to be going over different commander deck types. So, Veggie, we're going to start off with our honorable mention. These are going to be deck types that didn't make the top 5 list. What is your favorite type of commander deck?
Now, I know that you all are going to think that I'm going to pick Group Hug, but my honorable mention is actually one that some of you did vote for and didn't quite make it. It's Artifacts. Artifacts, which is also one of the most popular deck archetypes on EDHRec, our wonderful sponsor. I love Artifacts because you're not bound to a specific color that you need to build it in. Every different color can use artifacts in a different way. Of course, some better than others, blue. But you also there's so much freedom in an artifact build because the only thing that you need is the fact that they are artifacts, which do many, many different things.
There's a soft spot in my heart for artifacts. My first modern deck was Affinity. So, I know I'm a weirdo. But also, I will say, guys, that this Artifacts had the most decks on EDHRec compared to any of our other topics and narrowly missed the top 5. So many of you guys really do love this particular type of deck. Now, Veggie, this was your honorable mention. Do you have a commander that is your cherry on top?
The one that I'm running right now, Jetfire, the Transformer, it is as me as you can imagine. It's mono blue artifacts with a pretty bad commander.
You played that on the show, right? That's the same deck?
I did not play it on the show. I played Cyclonus, the significantly better Transformer.
Oh, fair.
But yeah, no, this one, I purposely did not play in our Transformer game because I thought it was way worse than the other ones, and I didn't think it could compete. I just really like I like the synergy, and this one is artifacts and +1 counters and big spells, and it just all, I was going to say it all works, but it all almost works.
The one thing I will say about artifact decks for me is I've made equipment decks, which is oftentimes very artifact heavy and has a lot of the artifact synergies built in to help you dig those out. But I've never built a true artifact deck. To me, it's a little intimidating.
You know what? That brings me an interesting point. Newer players, do you play artifact decks? Do you like artifact decks? And very experienced commander players, is that what you've made your way to?
I feel like it's intimidating. I don't know where I would even start to make a good artifact deck. So that's the side of the fence I'm on. But let's go ahead and move on to my honorable mention. And I don't know why you guys didn't vote for this because I think it's a sweet deck theme, and that is Spellslingers. My favorite deck, it hasn't been featured on the show, but it will be soon, is a Spellslinger deck, and I adore it so much.
Yeah, having a deck that is focused on playing instants and sorceries instead of other card types is a lot of fun, but also pretty challenging because a lot of those effects are, one-time things as opposed to permanents that are giving you continued value over and over again. Of course, your deck approaches that a little bit differently, but...
And my favorite thing about it is that you can build it in such a way that you can take advantage of spells, instants, and sorceries that are not classically good in Commander. So my Magar of the Magic Strings actually uses cards like Thoughtseize and some other weird ones that wouldn't be good, but are very good if you can cast them over and over again. It's such a fun deck.
Yeah, for all you terrible people out there that find joy in playing Thoughtseize, here you can play Thoughtseize in other formats where it should be bad, but for some reason is not.
It's so good. I can do it over and over again. This is what unresolved trauma looks like. It is so weird. In fact, I actually got a game win from casting Sign in Blood on my opponent over and over again on the Commander RC stream. It was a crazy win, and I love that deck.
That is, I think, probably the best part about the Spellslinger archetype is you never have a normal win. They're always these wild turns of out of nowhere. You're like, great. Everybody's got all of your boards ready? Cool. And spell.
Gutter snipe.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. So those are the end of our honorable mentions, but let's go ahead and get into your guys' top 5. And again, don't forget, make sure you guys go to the link in the description to vote for our next topics to ensure that your votes are counted. We want these lists to be as accurate as possible. So coming in at number 5, a favorite of mine, that is life gain decks.
They're not for me. But also, winning the game is not often for me. So, a game plan where you are very focused on staying alive in a game against 3 other people, is a good plan.
Yeah, one of my favorite decks that we've played recently will actually be coming up on an episode here in a few weeks. I got to play a food deck, and it used cards like Griffin Eerie and Resplendent Angel, and it feels like a warm hug.
I like it much better when you can turn that life gain into like...
Say it.
Progressing the board.
Value.
Although there is like... You can take the total other approach to life gain as well and just try and win outright with the life gain itself. Playing cards like Test of Endurance and Felidar Sovereign.
I was looking around really quick because I know we have a Felidar Sovereign jumbo card and I was going to like wave it around, but it's in my office. I forgot. Winning, to me, that's cheating, but whatever. I also have a grudge against Felidar Sovereign that I will take to my grave. I hate that card so much. Completely irrelevant for Commander. That hatred comes from something totally separate, but I am not going to build a deck to win that way, but I respect those who do.
Didn't you play a Sarah Ascendant on turn 1 in one of our games?
Yeah, and then I beat you in the face with it. I didn't just win the game. You could have removed it.
I'm the one that told you to put that in your deck.
Yeah, it was your Sarah Ascendant. That's the other funny thing about the comments for Decked Out. People are like, oh, Nerd Girl's so mean. She did this thing. Why would she put this in her deck and beat Veggie with it? And I'm like... Veggie built the deck, or Veggie gave me the card. It's half the time it's your fault.
Yeah, the loss is coming from inside the house. I've won too many games of Commander. This is like my penance.
From your tryhard days?
Yeah. Unfortunately, there are about 87,000 of you that are playing life gain decks all registered on EDHRec, which is... coincidentally, the amount of life that the typical life game player ends the game with.
But let's go ahead and keep the train moving, and we're going to go on to our number 4, Enchantments. Another Nerd Girl pick.
Did you make this list?
I cheated. I just made like a bunch of Google accounts and just started submitting answers. I got to play Enchantments in our recent Commander Masters game, and that was a really fun deck.
Yeah, actually, I as the other person playing Enchantments in that, I very much enjoyed that.
You were talking about a different game, actually. You're talking about the Wilds of Eldraine.
I am talking about a totally different game, the one that is Wilds of Eldraine, where I
was also a good game.
Enchantments. I really like just overwhelming board states. I like having so many things that I cannot keep track of all of them, and Enchantments is probably the best way to do it.
Enchantments is the best way to draw cards when you're not playing blue, and it's a nice feeling that I don't get all the time. So the idea that I'm just getting to loop into more and more things brings me much joy, and Enchantments fulfills my desire to play creatures to hit you in the face while also having cards in hand.
I don't know. I feel like this is going to be my ongoing theme for the themes. Is there's a lot of weird things that you can do with enchantments. Once you start turning them into creatures, of which there are many ways to do so, you get a lot of very strange interactions. And then, like, what a satisfying way to win. Oh, all of my enchantments, which were previously not doing anything to forward the game, are now all creatures. I'm going to swing out with them now. Like a good Dance of the Manse, a good Opalescence. Yes.
I'm actually going to be building a really unique enchantment deck is my next commander deck. We talked about it on a previous episode, but the Ariette, an Orzhov enchantment deck that wins by draining your opponent. That is such a cool way to build deck. You know, I'm honestly surprised that there are only 33,000 different enchantment decks. I'm wondering if that's just because there's less commanders that are like conducive to an enchantment deck, but it's one of our lowest numbers.
I would bet that changes pretty drastically in the coming like months and year with all the support that they've just recently gotten.
Yeah, 2 back-to-back sets, right? One in Commander Masters and in Eldraine. And there's like a new +1/+1 counter and card draw, like little mini Lord for enchantments that just came out in Eldraine.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of support. All right, let's go ahead and move on to your guys' choice for number 3, and that is Landfall decks. Landfall deck is actually going to be one of our patron submitted lists for today, so that's going to be fun to take a look at. But Veggie, I've never played a Landfall deck in Commander. What do you think about them?
I took mine apart because it did not lose. It
Too
was
many scoots?
Too many scoots. The toot, scoot, and boogie. It was. I should have said buggy. That would have been. All right, retake it. Landfall is a really, really hard strategy to beat. Lands are hard to interact with. And so you can't stop somebody from dropping a land. You can't counter a land.
You can't respond.
Right? You wouldn't counter a land. So you just get all of those triggers on the stack immediately. And they ramp up. Usually you have to play like ramp spells in spite of your game plan. You're like, okay, I have to sacrifice spots in my deck to be able to ramp. But now all of those spells are generating value while giving you more mana.
Yeah, with cards like Felidar Retreat, your lands turn into creatures and +1/+1 counters and card draw and pump spells. And nothing is a dead draw at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's just pure value.
There's so many different landfall triggers now too. Like you have stuff like Morag, which is extra combats for landfall. You have so many cards that give you creatures for landfall. There are things that like let you untap, or there are landfall like infinite combos, which is wild since per the rules of Magic the Gathering, you can only play one per turn.
And I love the abilities to bring back lands to your hand. There are plenty of cards that will do that. A big one is Multani. Is a big one, lets you return to get Multani back out of your graveyard, right? And then you just re-trigger all of those landfall abilities over and over again. Such a fun way to play Magic. Again, I haven't built one yet, but I also just like saying scoots. So I feel like I definitely will, just to have an excuse to play that over and over again.
An excoot, yeah.
An excoot to scoots.
Yeah.
And though Landfall is not the most popular deck type theme on EDHRec, it does have over 44,000 different decks.
Turns out that having all 99 cards in your deck be impactful is much better than only half of those.
So we've only got 2 left. Let's keep it going, and we are going to move on to number 2, and that is a +1/+1 counter theme deck.
So you did make this list, right?
Yep. I have built many of those.
It is difficult to stop the +1/+1 counter train.
Yep. Once it gets going, especially because it has green, and green has so much built-in protection, Blossoming Defense, Snakeskin Veil, the big one, that's like $10. Starts with an I think.
Heroic Intervention.
Intervention. There we go. That's the one I'm looking at. Good job. Thank you, Veggie.
Starts with an I, yes.
Well, I forgot the first.
I read the NerdGirl telepathy.
What is it when you have to act it out?
One word. Okay. Starts with an I. Heroic Intervention. That's effective communication.
So a lot that you can do to build these massive tall creatures, and then you get to protect them because you're playing green. So I am a huge fan of these types of decks, and on the show I usually volunteer to build them.
You have so many options because +1/+1 counters have been in the game for so long, as opposed to something like Landfall, which is a more recent mechanic. You just have the span of Magic history with to pick from for your deck.
And even if a new set doesn't revolve around +1/+1 counters, there's usually some support. So like just slowly but surely, it's the archetype is just being drip fed constant good cards, which is great. You have cards like, I don't know why I'm still trying to come up with names of cards because I can't remember them. Great Hench, that's the one I'm looking at. Or the new Lord of the Rings card. The girl.
Rosie Cotton.
Nope.
Arwen.
Yeah, that one.
Oh, yeah, right. The one that you did some stuff with in a game.
Beat you too.
You cannot let one creature stay on the board for the +1/+1 counter player, because every single creature can just suddenly become the big threat.
Do you like +1/+1 counter decks?
There are two things. One, they are incredibly popular, and the typical build for them is something that you will see pretty frequently. And I value something weird and bad. And +1/+1 counters are neither of those things. They're pretty normal, and they're good. So I would want something that has a different approach to it, similar to like
Legolas.
Yes, to like Legolas, or I think the perfect example is the Gruul +1/+1 counter deck that Melissa DeTora played on the show.
Oh yeah, the one with the boombox.
That one was the ideal, like, oh, this is very different and still very good and fascinating to watch your pilot.
And it's also important to note that the +1/+1 counters deck theme, there is so many different ways that you can build it that there are actually 67,000 different deck lists on EDHRec. That's a bunch of different commanders and a bunch of different includes, with so many different options out there and support that this type has. You're going to be able to make so many different versions. And that brings us to your number one choice for different deck themes, and that is creature type.
Yeah. Maybe we could have seen this one coming. This is for sure an across-the-board fan favorite, and it's almost like cheating, because this isn't just one archetype. This is tons and tons of different archetypes kind of all lumped into one.
Yeah, and by far the most decks on EDHRec are single creature type. We counted up just the 5 most popular different creature types, and there was over 202,000 deck lists. People feel like they can really get behind a different theme, like, yeah, goblins, zombies, elves. You know, I feel like it does sort of foster this like little mini community of people who are really into that creature type. Look at like Jim Davis's whole streaming community, right? The pile drivers, there you go. So I do feel like they tend to have these banners that people will gather around.
It's so easy to connect and relate to a creature type, because it gives you both like, oh, like the lore and the like established like fantasy roles of that creature on top of a very specific play style. So with all of the different archetypes that we've covered already, it is just kind of one or the other. It's either like, here is a play style. You get everything.
The other thing too is I feel like it's very good for new players and for people who are maybe not as great at deck building. I feel like I can build a lot of creature type decks where, you know, I'm not as experienced of a deck builder as you. You know, if it says goblin, put it in the deck. It maybe isn't optimal, but it's probably not a bad choice either. So you just end up with this like really solid deck. No matter what elf you put in, it's going to be there. It's going to be playable.
There's a lot there for the more experienced players as well, because whether you're taking a very popular creature type and looking for those deep dive, like very optimal cards, or picking a very left field creature type and then trying to build around that, there is really something for everyone when you're focused on creatures.
All right, what's your favorite creature type for Commander other than Homarid? He just doesn't have one.
Nephilim.
You know, I've got to go with goblins, I guess. I think I might have had my elf deck earlier when I was younger, but my goblin deck stuck around. I still have it, and it turned into like a real deck where my elves didn't. So
I do really enjoy wizards. Yeah,
you did play wizards. That was a really fun one, because you died. That wraps up our top 5 and honorable mentions for overall deck theme. But next, thanks to our sponsor, EDHRec, we are going to do a deck tech submitted by one of our patrons that matches the theme of today's episode. Today's deck list was submitted by our patron Lucius, and we're going to be looking at a Landfall deck that is based around Omnath, Locus of Creation.
Oh boy, this was the specific one that I had to take apart because it was so good. Omnath, Locus of Creation is a red, green, white, and a blue for a 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. And Landfall. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life. If this is the first time this ability... that's a lot of words. Too bad I'm not going to read them. Omnath, Locus of Creation. A red, a green, a white, and a blue for a 4/4 elemental. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. And then the big one... Landfall. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life if this is the first time this ability resolved this turn. If it's the second time, add a red, a green, a white, and a blue to your mana pool. And if it's the third time, Omnath deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control.
Ew. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And it's going to take advantage of like all the cards that bring back lands to your hand. Cards like Evolving Wilds. Ugh.
Yeah, it is surprisingly easy to play 3 lands a turn.
Yes, certainly with green, that's the case. So let's go ahead and take a look at the deck list that was submitted by Lucius for this commander. And then afterwards, we're going to peek around EDHRec and see if we can maybe make some suggestions, spice it up, or maybe make it a little bit more fun or worse if we think it's too good.
Let's see what we got. All right, yeah. Ashaya Soul of the Wild. This card breaks a lot of things. If all of your creatures are also lands, so right off the bat, just play 3 creatures and you've hit your triple trigger.
Yep, that card is pretty nasty.
Yeah, actually, we've got all of the heavy hitters right up in the front because also Cultivator Colossus. Allows you to drop a bunch of lands into play in the same turn. And Uvenwald Hydra is an easy way to search for the best lands that you have in your deck.
Colossus is the one that lets you play lands and get more cards, right? Like that's pretty important. That card is insane.
I don't think I've seen this included in a lot of Omnath decks. The Well of Lost Dreams, because that first ability gains you 4 life, you can just convert that immediately into 4 card draw. Morag, like I had mentioned from before, that's an easy way to end the game is just get 50 combat steps.
I see a lot of the sacrifice lands here. We have all the hideouts from Capenna, Evolving Wilds, Fabled Passage.
And the bounce lands as well, ensuring that you have more lands in your hand to play.
This is no longer a downside, it is an upside.
And Retreat to Coral Helm, a very tricky card because you don't realize how valuable the untap creature can be, especially when you're getting it multiple times in a game. So usually that sticks on the board and it becomes a problem very quickly.
Protection spells, we've got a lot to sort of, protect our very large, tall threats. We've got Heroic Intervention, Teferi's Protection.
I will say I'm surprised. This seems very light on protection. Like the what they've got here is powerful, but just like a handful of ways to keep your Omnath. And the ramp. Here we go. AC is just like the perfect card for this deck. Extra lands and draw on your lands.
It's important to note too that like a lot of these things, they're ramp, but they're also going to turn into creatures like Beseiju Skyward. That is going to just turn into a creature. And the way that they have these things organized here is that like, the Dryad and even AC, like a 5/5 is not just ramp. That is a substantial body.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that Invasion of Zendikar made it into the deck because I think more people should be playing battles in Commander. It's a fun thing that adds another layer to combat. Scapeshift, another game ender, 4 mana to get a landfall trigger for pretty much every land that you have on the board already. Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch. I don't remember what this card does. That seemed like a weird include, yeah, because this one seems like a Spellslinger card. It's returning instants and sorceries at random from your graveyard to your hand and dealing damage on instants and sorceries. Maybe there is some sort of synergy or combo that I'm missing.
I mean, it could just be that the deck has a high volume of instants and sorceries that are fetching out lands, and it's a good way to sort of cycle those back in and make it so that way you're getting more and more landfall triggers, but also giving you a little bit of reach.
I guess so.
Conduit of Worlds is a really cool include too. It's a newer card. Gives you some card advantage in green. You don't have as much card draw, but you can replay some of those really tall creatures if you miss out on getting to protect them.
Yes. And of course, having that Crucible of Worlds effect on all three of the cards that we see at the top here means all of your fetch lands are replayed. That's you can ensure to never miss a land drop and that you're always getting at least 2 since you're playing a fetch.
Multiple board clears here, Supreme Verdict and End Hostilities.
These decks are always able to rebuild pretty quickly, and you don't end up with a lot of creatures on the board oftentimes.
Not as much removal as I would have thought, honestly. You can't not have Scoot Swarm.
You can't not have Scoot Swarm, and you can't not have just one Scoot Swarm. We saw a lot of cards that trigger that multiple times, so as soon as it comes down, it's probably making a bunch of copies of itself.
I love Scoots.
Gruul Omnath, also nothing to... all of the words are gone out of my head. Gruul Omnath, also very good here. You're making an army of elementals and dealing damage when they get killed.
And we've got some tutors here, Enlightened Tutor, Mystical Tutor. So overall, a really well put together deck. I feel like there was top end, plenty of ramp, plenty of ways to find your pieces that you need.
So we saw that this deck does have a lot of very good synergies, and these tutors are probably to fish out one particular combo that does exist here. There is the Retreat to Coral Helm, which I noted from before, so Landfall, untap a creature, and it did have one little creature snuck in here, Sakura Tribe Scout, which simply taps to put a land onto the battlefield.
So it just allows you to continue to bounce and make infinite landfall triggers.
Right. As long as you've got one of those bounce lands that just returns itself, the three of those together makes an infinite loop. And as long as you've got something that benefits from landfall, you get as many of those triggers as you want.
All right, let's take a look at EDHRec. Now that we've taken a look at the list, let's go ahead and see what EDHRec suggests for possible upgrades.
Now, wait, we should point out, this is rank 18.
Whoa.
This is a very popular commander.
I didn't even notice that. Yeah, over 12,000 different decks uploaded to EDHRec for this commander.
Oh, yeah. And there are certainly some new cards that came out that would make this very good. Like the Virtue of Knowledge, double your ETBs, and all landfall triggers are ETBs. Nissa would be a lot of fun if you were focusing maybe more on like an elemental strategy.
The other Nissa, the Flip Planeswalker one as well, when she comes into play, she fetches lands out as well. It's nice.
I had Lotus Cobra in my original build of this deck, and it did serious work, and I'm very surprised to not see it in this list.
I noticed that it wasn't in there when we were going through the list, but I thought maybe that was just more of a constructed thing because Lotus Cobra and like playing Omnath very quickly was a thing in standard for a minute. But you're not going to get... Lotus Cobra isn't helping to enable your landfalls. It's just helping you get out those big landfall cards quicker. So I absolutely love it, but I wasn't sure it should be included.
Hammy agrees. And here's another one that I was very surprised because this was in my original build, and I had a lot of fun with it, and it just seems to do everything that you want. Ancient Green Warden. So not only does it give you another copy of Crucible of Worlds to be able to play lands from your graveyard, it also just straight up doubles your landfall triggers. If a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability to happen, it does it another time.
Yeah, definitely seems like a great include. That wasn't in the deck? We did see Scoots and Tatiova.
Wait, there wasn't an Avenger of Zendikar in this list.
Oh, wow. You know, I'm learning that there are more landfall bombs that I have blocked out of my memory.
A classic finisher for many, many decks and like iconic landfall card.
Isn't there's another version that does something very similar in Gruul colors?
Yes, that is...
Phylath. There we go. Now I'm starting to see some cards that I wish was in the deck, and that is Felidar Retreat. I think Lucius built a deck that was maybe even too good for me. I want some cuter things like Felidar Retreat.
I think Felidar Retreat is very good. So we're I think seeing the difficulty of deck building for this archetype. there are way more good cards for it than we even realized.
Yeah, because we were going through the list and we didn't really, nothing seemed like it was wrong, and we didn't really think of anything else. But then we see this list and we're like, oh, wait, why is this not here?
Right.
And it just,
yeah, like it feels tough to leave out a card like Rampaging Baloths that's making a 4/4 every land, but like, where do you find space?
yeah, especially when they're all 6+ drops.
Or yeah, we didn't see Locus of the Royal, this Omnath, which is another way to win the game, just pumping out elementals and growing those.
Oh, I love Risen Reef.
Right?
That's such a cute card.
Yeah. I guess that's like you can do a more like elemental focused build of Omnath, but if you're not focused there, it doesn't make sense to have one or two.
Yeah.
Elish Norn and I guess like any of your other ETB doublers are also reasonable choices for this.
Yeah, that's actually a nice include I did not think of. And honestly, you're hurting your opponents as well in a way that, even if you're not doing much in landfalls, it's still going to be making a big impact on the board.
Yeah. The Kodama of the East Tree, I think that's the last card that I immediately knew from my original Omnath list that I was surprised to not see, because the ability from Kodama does allow you to play additional lands. It doesn't specify non-land, so if you play a land, it triggers, allowing you to put another one in.
This seems like a tough deck to build, honestly.
Yeah.
Hey, there's the one I was talking about. Phylath.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I maybe understand why they couldn't fit this one in, because this one specifies basic lands.
Oh, I did not remember that.
I didn't remember that either.
I just remember dying to it in limited. A lot.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I didn't see in this list that I think would be pretty cool is maybe some planeswalkers that deal with lands. Something like a Koth, which lets you dig up mountains, which would trigger some of your ETBs and things.
Yeah. Or any of the Wrens.
Yeah.
Very land-centered planeswalkers.
The other cool thing we should look at is actually utility lands, right? Because this isn't something we usually look at much because, they're a dozen different lands you couldn't put in a deck, and whether you should have them or not is just a preference or a flavor thing. But for this deck, it really isn't. And the first one that jumps out at me is Field of the Dead. Feels like an auto-include in an Omnath deck.
Feels like an auto-include in an Omnath deck. I think I'd have to go back and look at like the land base that's in there, but for sure you're getting a bunch of triggers out of this. We had a suggestion from Airball that they're also the suite of gates and mazes, and on top of Field of the Dead, since you have Scapeshift and things like that. Again, another approach to building this deck that is certainly reasonable. And like, how do you make a decision?
There's just not enough space. You need 150 cards.
Yes.
All right. Well, that wraps up our deck tech. Veggie, what would you like to see added to this deck or removed?
I definitely want some of those cards that I'd had, I think in my original build, Kodama, Ancient Green Warden, and I feel like you just can't miss on Field of the Dead.
Yeah. I mean, I hate Field of the Dead, so like I would not put it in because... but now what is your veggie rating for flavor, power, synergy? This
still gets very high marks from me, because I mean it was a deck that I played. I remember excellent win after win after win with Omnath at the helm, and there are a lot of cards in here that make me very happy. Plus you have ways to go infinite. I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10 on the veggie scale.
Okay, that's pretty good. For me, I would like to see more of a token build. So I would like to see Retreat to Emeria or Feladar's Retreat and some of those big elemental plant guys that pump out a bunch of little 0/1 plants and then they get really big and scary. That would be my personal preference for a build here. One other card I love for a landfall deck is Multani. I think that would, for me, would be an auto-include in every deck, but I still really liked it. So I'm going to give it a 7 on the Nerd Girl scale.
7s all around. That's it for the deck tech and for our episode on the different archetypes for Commander. As always, thank you to EDHRec, our incredible sponsor, and a great place to go to take a look at all of the different archetypes Commander has to offer.
And thank you to Lucius for submitting today's patron deck tech. If you guys would like to become a part of the show, make sure you guys head on over to our Patreon where you can unlock cool perks like signed tokens, spell table games with us, and even submit your own deck list for us to check out here on the show.
And now is the time where you click like on the video or you subscribe to the channel and you leave us a comment for what archetypes that you thought should have made the list for top 5. We will see you next time on Commander Countdown.
And don't forget to vote on the next topics.
Do
I
that.
forgot to mention.
Do that.
Don't forget to vote.